Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us, our Sunday service, and happy Valentine's Day. Hope you all remembered your candy and flowers and chocolates. Yeah. As always, I recommend you put your Zoom into speaker view to get the most out of our service this morning. And hopefully you were able to check out the announcements either in the e-newsletter or in the slideshow that precedes our service. And if not, I'd like to just mention a couple of them. One of them is of a timely nature. Sonia Claiborne's memorial service will be a week from tomorrow, and it's going to be a Zoom service. It will be led by our beloved Reverend Libby Smith, and it'll be at 7 p.m. And we're going to use the same link that we use for our Sunday services. So it'll be easy to get on there and if you want to take part in her life celebration. The other thing I wanted to mention was our new amazing website. Check it out, use it. It's there for you.
Karen.
So, welcome to this congregation where we seek to foster community, to grow our spirits, to serve others, and to work for justice. We're glad that you've joined us this morning in our sacred cyberspace and hope you will experience inspiration, acceptance, and love. After the service, please join us for our Zoom coffee hour. Our monthly Touchstones themes strive to help us shape our days and guide our journeys. Our February topic is mercy. The prophet Micah counseled us to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with our God. These qualities are universal and transformative. Justice and humility are important, but it is the love of mercy that is crucial. To love mercy is to understand how very important it is in human relations. Mercy is a grace because it is not deserved. It allows a person to return to life with dignity. Our sermon today will be from the Reverend Kim Wilson. Ordained in 2001, Reverend Kim currently serves the UU Fellowship of the Poconos in Stroudsburg and the Schuylkill UUs in Pottsville. She and her wife share an old Victorian home in Bethlehem. And when she's not engaged in ministry, Reverend Kim enjoys yoga, gardening, and genealogy. The title of her sermon today is Just Mercy and the Legacy of Racism. Bryan Stevenson is the author of the memoir Just Mercy, which has also been made into a film. In addition to Stevenson's work to reverse death sentences for wrongfully convicted prisoners, he is a strong advocate for learning the truth about our nation's history of slavery and discrimination. And he explains how doing so could change us for the better. Now, let us enter into worship together. Our amazing musician, Avi Wisnia, has chosen for our prelude this morning a classic Marvin Gaye song.
Mother, mother, there's too many of you crying. Brother, 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 there's far too many of you dying. You know we've got to find a way to bring some loving here today. Oh, Father. need to escalate. War is not the answer, for only love can conquer hate. You know we've got to find a way to bring some loving here today. Oh, picket lines and picket signs don't punish me with brutality. Just talk to me so you can see, hey, what's going on? What's going on? Tell me what's going on. What's going on? What's going on? Mother, mother, everybody thinks we're wrong. Oh, but who are they to judge us? Simply 'cause our hair is long. You know we've got to find a way to bring some understanding here today. Oh, picket lines and picket signs don't punish me with brutality. Just talk to me so you can see what's going on. What's going on? 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 Tell me what's going on. What's going on? What's going on? Oh, mercy, mercy me. Oh, mercy, mercy me. Oh, mercy, mercy me. Oh, mercy, 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 mercy.
Start again.
With Sonia's passing this week, we thought it would be nice to have her light the chalice one last time. Please feel free to join me in reading the words.
We light our chalice this morning, grateful for the love that we experience in this beloved community. May this flame light our way to inner peace, to love for each other, and faith in ourselves.
Thank you, Sonia. You will be missed. Our opening words this morning are from the Reverend Dr. Andrew Pakula. Come into this circle of community. Come into this sacred space. Be not tentative. Bring your whole self. Bring the joy that makes your heart sing. Bring your kindness and your compassion. Bring also your sorrow, your pain. Bring your brokenness and your disappointments. Spirit of love and mystery, help us to recognize the spark of the divine that resides within each of us. May we know the joy of wholeness. May we know the joy of being together. Our Director of Religious Exploration, Angela Connon, has a beautiful message for all ages for us this morning.
Good morning, everybody. Today's service topic is about the legacy of racism, and I wanted to read from this beautiful book of poetry called Brown Girl Dreaming. The piece I've chosen for today is called Second Daughter's Second Day on Earth, and it's by Jacqueline Woodson. My birth certificate says, female Negro, mother, Mary Ann Irby, 22, Negro. Father, Jack Austin Woodson, Negro. In Birmingham, Alabama, Martin Luther King Jr. is planning a march on Washington, where John F. Kennedy is president. In Harlem, Malcolm X is standing on a soapbox, talking about a revolution. Outside the window of the university hospital, snow is slowly falling. So much already covers this vast Ohio ground. In Montgomery, only 7 years have passed since Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a city bus. I am born brown-skinned, black-haired, and wide-eyed. I am born Negro here and colored there. And somewhere else, the freedom singers have linked arms, their protests rising into song. Deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome someday. And somewhere else, James Baldwin is writing about injustice, each novel, each essay, changing the world. I do not yet know who I'll be, what I'll say, how I'll say it. Not even 3 years have passed since a brown girl named Ruby Bridges walked into an all-white school. Armed guards surrounded her while hundreds of white people spat and called her names. She was 6 years old. I do not know if I'll be strong like Ruby. I do not know what the world will look like when I am finally able to walk, speak, write. Another Buckeye, the nurse says to my mother. Already I am being named for this place, Ohio, the Buckeye State. My fingers curl into fists automatically. This is the way, my mother said, of every baby's hand. I do not know if these hands will become Malcolm's, raised and fisted, or Martin's, open and asking, or James's, curled around a pen. I do not know if these hands will be Rosa's or Ruby's, gently gloved and fiercely folded, calmly in a lap, on a desk, around a book, ready to change the world. Well, I hope you enjoyed that poem. I know I think it's one of several gorgeous pieces in that book. So remember, if you can, check it out, Brown Girl Dreaming. Okay, thanks everybody. Bye.
Thank you, Angela, for those beautiful and inspiring words. For our interlude this morning, Avi has chosen a song with some beautiful title, Find the Light.
I wish upon you grace, I wish upon you peace. I wish for less of what you want and more of what you need. I wish upon you an old life with a heart that stays young. But most of all, I wish upon you love. I wish upon you truth when all you feel is doubt. I hope you know that an open mind still knows when to shut things out. I wish upon you a brave heart that will always rise above. But most of all, I wish upon you love. See, as the sun sets and the moon begins to rise, even in the darkness you'll find the light. You'll find the light. You'll find the light. You'll find the light. Yeah, even in the darkness, you'll find the light. life. I wish upon you hard times. I hope you know that both joy and pain each need their moment to shine. I wish you ears that are quick to listen, that you're slow to use that tongue. But most of all, I wish upon you love. As the sun sets and the moon begins to rise, see, even in the darkness you'll find the light. You'll find the light. You'll find the light. You'll find the light. Yeah, even in the darkness, you'll find the light.
Wow, that is a beautiful song. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our guest speaker today, Reverend Kim Wilson, who will give her reading.
Thank you so much, Gil. You know, I sometimes think of a worship service as putting together pieces of a puzzle into a whole. And normally, I'm the one who's creating those puzzle pieces and hope that they all fit together during the service. But this has been really beautiful listening to how the pieces that Ari chose and the story that Angela read. So I'm just really pleased at how those pieces are fitting into this larger whole. Right now, I'd like to share with you a reading by Ibram X. Kendi. And this reading is from the prologue of Stamped from the Beginning, The Definitive History of Racist Ideas in America. And if you haven't seen it yet, I highly recommend it. He writes so clearly, and you will come away with a very clear understanding of the history of racist ideas. So one of the things that he has identified is that what drives the racist ideas is not people's ignorance or their hatred. It's really people with self-interest. So he says, hate and ignorance have not driven the history of racist ideas. Racist policies have driven the history of racist ideas in America. And this fact becomes apparent when we examine the causes behind the production of racist ideas. Time and again, racist ideas have not been cooked up from the boiling pot of ignorance and hate. Time and again, powerful and brilliant men and women have produced racist ideas in order to justify the racist policies of their era, in order to redirect the blame from their era's racial disparities away from those policies and onto Black people. Racially discriminatory policies have usually sprung from economic, political, and cultural self-interests. Politicians seeking higher office have primarily created and defended discriminatory policies out of political self-interest, not because of their racist ideas. Capitalists seeking to increase profit margins have primarily created and defended discriminatory policies out of economic self-interest, not because of their racist ideas. Cultural professionals, including theologians, artists, scholars, and journalists, were seeking to advance their careers or cultures and have primarily created and defended discriminatory policies out of professional self-interest, not because of their racist ideas. When we look back on our history, we often wonder why so many Americans did not resist slave trading, enslaving, segregating, or now mass incarcerating. The beneficiaries of slavery, segregation, and mass incarceration have produced racist ideas of Black people being best suited for or deserving of the confines of slavery, segregation, or the jail cell. Consumers of these racist ideas have been led to believe there is something wrong with Black people and not the policies that have enslaved, oppressed, and confined so many Black people.
Thank you, Reverend Kim. It's a lot to think about. Very interesting stuff. For our split plate offertory for the month of February, our awesome We Care committee has designated that funds should go toward climate change efforts. It was determined the best place to send donations is the Coalition for Rainforest Nations, an intergovernmental organization of over 50 rainforest nations around the world, from Ecuador to Bangladesh to Fiji. Their mission is simply to protect the rainforest. This coalition were participants in the formation of the section on forestry in the Paris Agreement. Every 12 cents donated will avert approximately 1 metric ton of carbon dioxide. Money well spent. So please be generous. You can give by clicking the link provided in our amazing new website, or the link in our e-newsletter, or go old school and mail a check to UUFLB. And if you do send a check, be sure to remember to write split plate on your check memo line. We only have one planet, so please give with your heart. And now I'm pleased to reintroduce Reverend Kim to give her sermon, Just Mercy and the Legacy of Racism. You need to unmute, Reverend Kim. We can't hear you.
A few seconds before I was ready to speak, I remembered it. So let me start by wishing everyone a very happy Valentine's Day, our annual celebration of the power of love. Recently, I've been thinking a lot about the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s idea of the beloved community. He based the idea on a concept of love called agape. Agape comes from the Greek word agape, and King described it as goodwill for all, an overflowing love, which is purely spontaneous, unmotivated, and the love of God operating in the human heart. He said, agape does not begin by discriminating between worthy and unworthy people. It begins by loving others for their sakes. It was agape that underpinned all of Dr. King's work. We owe so much gratitude to Dr. King and the many others who put themselves on the line during the civil rights movement. In our current decade, one of the leaders in the fight against racial injustice is Bryan Stevenson. Stevenson says that in the 50s and 60s, we believed that we could just gain equal rights and desegregate, and we would undo racism. But we now understand that the problems go way deeper, back to the beginning of white settlement in the American colonies and even before. As Ibram X. Kendi writes in his book, Stamped from the Beginning, it was self-interest on the part of those in power that created and perpetuated racist ideas, from slave traders and slave holders to the upholders of Jim Crow laws and those involved in making and enforcing laws and policies right up to today. And sadly, most of the rest of us, the consumers of the racist ideas, we assume that we are being told the truth. This morning, I'd like to spend some time talking about Attorney Bryan Stevenson's work and how it fits into the larger picture of the work of undoing racism in this country as we now understand it. Stevenson, who grew up in Southern Delaware, says that he is a product of Brown versus Board of Education. He went to a colored school for the first few years because Black children weren't allowed to attend the public school. And there was no high school for Black kids. But he says, I remember how lawyers came into our community and made them open up the public schools. That's what created opportunities for me to go to high school, to go to college, to go to law school. Stevenson had observed that the law had the power to achieve justice and opportunity that wasn't possible otherwise. And that led him to pursue a law degree. He founded and is director of the Equal Justice Initiative, which provides legal representation to people who've been illegally convicted unfairly sentenced or abused in state prisons. Stevenson and his staff have won reversals, relief, or release for over 135 wrongly condemned prisoners on death row, and gained relief for hundreds of others who were wrongly convicted or unfairly sentenced. He obtains just mercy for them when the system did not. His movie, Just Mercy, was originally a memoir by the same name, and tells the story of a man on death row whose case Stevenson is appealing. A younger Stevenson believed that his work would lead to reforms in the criminal justice system. But about a decade ago, he had begun to sense less commitment to basic rights around equality and fairness. He says, wrongful convictions were epidemic, and yet the court didn't seem motivated to respond to that in a meaningful, structural, or systemic way. He says that he began to worry that we weren't going to achieve the kind of change, the kind of reform, the kind of justice that I think is desperately needed in this country if we stayed in the courts alone. Stevenson also had several experiences that became stark reminders that it wasn't just the legal and criminal justice systems that needed reform. The criminal justice system was not going to change racial injustice in America. It's the narrative that has to change. And the narrative is the presumption of dangerousness and guilt of Black people. When Stevenson was in his 20s, he was practicing at the Southern Prisoners Defense Committee. He had just moved into a new apartment in Atlanta. He'd gotten home from a long day at work. He says, "It was late at night. I'd been working on a case involving a young man who had just been killed by police in Alabama. And I was really enjoying the fact that my radio was playing. It didn't usually play. And I was listening to Sly and the Family Stone, sitting outside my apartment, and then a police car pulled up. And I was curious what they were looking for. And they shined the light on me, and I realized that, oh, they're here for me. And I got out of my car. I was going to explain to them that this is where I live. Before I could say a word, the police officer pulled a gun, pointed it at my head and said, "Move, and I'll blow your head off." I saw him standing there. His hands were shaking. I was terrified. And I put my hands up and I began saying, "It's okay. It's all right. It's okay. It's all right." And a second officer got out of the car, came up behind me, threw me on the back of the vehicle and wouldn't let me reach in my wallet to get my driver's license to show that this is where I lived. And it just turned into this horrible ordeal where they kept me out there for 15 minutes. Neighbors were coming out. People were complaining about burglaries in the neighborhood. They were asking the police to interrogate me about their missing items. You know, ask him if he has my vacuum cleaner. Ask him if he took my cat. One of the officers did a completely illegal search of the vehicle, went inside the car, started digging around, and I could never persuade them that I was there legitimately. After they found nothing in the car, I asked them to apologize, and they wouldn't. The officer who left said, "You should be lucky you got away. Next time, we'll get you." The absence of an apology, says Stevenson, is what made it even more terrifying. It made him worry about what those police officers were going to do to other Black men. And now, looking back, he feels very strongly that we need to have a bigger conversation than those he was having in legal cases. We have to have a bigger conversation about what it's going to take to repair all of the damage that has been done by centuries of bigotry and bias, he says. I still have to navigate these presumptions of dangerousness and guilt, he continues. I went into a court not too long ago, had my suit and tie on. I was sitting at the defense counsel's table. The judge walked in and he saw me sitting there and he got angry. He said, hey, you get back out there in the hallway and you wait till your lawyer gets here. And I had to stand up and apologize. I said, "I'm sorry, Your Honor. I didn't introduce myself. My name is Bryan Stevenson. I am the lawyer." And the judge started laughing and the prosecutor started laughing. I made myself laugh because I didn't want to disadvantage my client. But afterward, I was thinking, what is it when this judge saw a middle-aged Black man in a suit and tie sitting at defense counsel that it never occurred to him that's the lawyer? What that is the legacy of this narrative of racial differences. It's a presumption of dangerousness and guilt. And now I'm 60 years old, And I can tell you that when you have to constantly navigate these presumptions, when you could be a teacher or a doctor or a lawyer or a journalist, a student, be doing your best, not meaning harm to anybody, and still be presumed dangerous and guilty. I can tell you that as I get older, it's exhausting. And I just want something better for people in this country. I want something different for the next generation. Bryan Stevenson continues to work within the justice system, but he's also started working outside the courts. While those in power may continue to uphold discriminatory policies blaming Black people, Stephen wants to give the consumers of their racist ideas opportunities to better understand the racist aspects of American history. So Stevenson and the Equal Justice Initiative founded the Legacy Museum, which dramatizes racial injustice from enslavement to mass incarceration. And they created the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, which is dedicated to the memory of African Americans terrorized by lynching and abused by racial segregation, assumptions of guilt, and police violence. The museum, the memorial, and the Equal Justice Initiative are all in Montgomery, Alabama. After the Civil War, there were 100 years of terrorism and violence, says Stevenson. Black people were pulled out of their homes, beaten, drowned, tortured, and lynched, and the law did nothing. Communities did nothing. The nation did nothing. And then, when we got to the civil rights movement, we had this heroic moment. But that narrative of racial difference and this presumption of dangerousness and guilt continued, and we're still burdened by it today. And so talking about this became a real priority. Stevenson went to South Africa and saw in Johannesburg that there's an apartheid museum. They want to make sure people don't forget the injustices of apartheid. He talked to people from Rwanda. The people of Rwanda want every visitor to be aware of the horrific genocide that took place. There's a genocide museum in Kigali that actually has human skulls. He went to Berlin. The Germans want people to go to the Holocaust Memorial. German school children are required to go. There are no Adolf Hitler statues in Germany. But in this country, we don't have institutions that are dedicated and focused on making sure a new generation of Americans appreciates the wrongfulness of what we did in enslavement and lynching and segregation. The Southern landscape is littered with the iconography of the Confederacy. More than 240 schools across the US are still named in honor of Confederate leaders. Half of them serve students that are predominantly Black or non-white. We're still celebrating the defenders of enslavement. And so there has to be a reckoning and a change in our American narrative. The Legacy Museum is located on the former site of a slave warehouse, a block from the auction space where enslaved people were sold. As you go into the warehouse, you see what it would look like if you were enslaved. There are slave pens that look empty, but when you walk up to them, a hologram appears, and then you'll see and hear an enslaved person who will give an account of how they were pulled away from their families and how they were sold. The museum goes from slavery to lynching, and then to segregation and to the contemporary era. You can sit down, pick up a phone, and talk to someone who's incarcerated in prison today. Stevenson had his clients record their personal accounts of what it was like to be a 13-year-old sentenced to life without parole, what it was like to be innocent on death row. The National Memorial for Peace and Justice memorializes the deaths of 4,000 people who were hanged, burned, shot, or beaten to death between 1877 and 1950. Each lynching has been researched and documented. People were lynched for just about any reason. Telling white school children who were throwing rocks at you to stop, complaining about the fact that your husband was lynched, not calling a white man sir, or not getting off the sidewalk when a white person walked past. Stevenson said, uncovering all this history made him acutely aware of the absolute terror of living in a place where you could be killed at any moment. In Montgomery alone, there are over 50 markers and memorials that celebrate the glory of the Confederacy. And he says, you're just sort of required to accept this cultural environment that is hostile to the history that Black people have had to endure, and that is indifferent to the violence and degradation that slavery represents. It creates an environment that causes people to be dishonest about who we are and what we've lived through. If you don't have a consciousness of wrongdoing, if you don't have a sense of shame about these horrific human rights violations, you're not motivated to make sure you don't replicate these things. I think that's what's different about present-day Germany. They've banned the swastika. They do not want anyone celebrating or glorifying what happened during that horrific period of the Holocaust. At the museum, there are hundreds of jars of soil that were collected from lynching sites. The lynching victim is named and the date of death is shown. Volunteers go to a lynching site and dig up soil for the jars. For many people, it's been a powerful opportunity to do something tangible and redemptive and restorative. Stevenson tells the following story. We had a middle-aged Black woman come to see one of our events, and she was nervous about going to a lynching site by herself, but after the meeting, she was sort of fired up, and we gave her the jar. We gave her the memo with the information about the lynching. She went out to this lynching site, which was in a pretty remote area. She got really nervous, but she decided to do it. She went to the place where the lynching took place. She was about to start digging when a truck drove by, and there was this white man in the truck who slowed down and stared at her. And then she said the truck stopped and turned around and drove back by, and the man stared at her some more. And then she said the truck stopped, and this big white guy got out and started walking toward her. She was very nervous. And we tell people that you don't have to explain what you're doing. If you want to say that you're just getting dirt for your garden, feel free to say that. And that's what she intended to do. But when this white man walked up to her and he said, "What are you doing?" She said, "Something got a hold of me." And I turned to that man and I said, "I'm digging soil because this is where a Black man was lynched in 1931, and I'm going to honor his life." And she said she was so scared that she started digging real fast. And then the man stood there and he said, "Does that paper talk about the lynching?" And she said, "Yes, it does." And then he said, "Can I read it?" And she gave the man the paper, and he stood there reading while she was digging. And then he put the paper down and stunned her by asking, "Would it be okay if I helped you?" And then she told me that this white man got on his knees. She offered him the little plow to dig the soil, and he said, No, you use that." And he started throwing his hands into the soil with such force. His hands were getting coated with this black soil. They were just turning black, and he was putting them in the jar. But he kept throwing his hands, and it moved her. And she said the next thing she knew, she had tears running down her face. And he stopped and he said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I'm upsetting you." And she said, No. You're blessing me." And they kept putting the soil in the jar. And they got the jar almost full. And she noticed toward the end that the man was slowing down and that his shoulders were shaking. And she turned and she looked and she saw the man had tears running down his face, and she stopped. And she put her hand on this man's shoulder and she said, "Are you all right?" And that's when the man said to her, "No, I'm just so worried that it might have been my grandparents that were involved in lynching this man." And she said they both sat there with tears running down their faces. At the end of it, he stood up and said, "I want to take a picture of you holding the jar." And she said, "I want to take a picture of you holding the jar." And they both took pictures holding the jar. And she brought this man back, and they put that jar on our exhibit together. Stevenson continues, "Now, beautiful things like that don't always happen when you tell the truth about history, when you try to actually look for redemption and restoration, when you have every reason to be afraid and angry. But until we commit to some acts like that, until we tell the truth, we deny ourselves the beauty of redemption, the beauty of restoration." Says Stevenson, "I want a world where no Black person has to be presumed dangerous and guilty. I want a world where my children and grandchildren and nephews and nieces are not having to navigate all of the obstacles that I've had to navigate. But we cannot get there if we're unwilling to have enough hope, enough belief, enough faith that if we tell the truth, we can get to something that looks like justice. With agape love in our hearts, may we have the hope, the belief, and the faith that if we tell the truth, we can get to justice. May it be so.
Thank you, Reverend Kim. That was beautiful and powerful. I'm always amazed at how far we've come in my lifetime, and more amazed at how much further we have to go. Now is the time in our service when we recognize and lift up one another in love. Let us be fully present and listen with open hearts. If you wish to share a joy or a sorrow, please click on Participants and then click Raise Hand, and we will help you to unmute. For everyone's benefit, please be brief. And while you're doing that, I'll start things out with, I have a joy. I'm sure you already know my joy is our new website. And if you haven't checked it out yet, please do so. We can thank Kara Fisher, who designed it and created it. Kara, of course, is Ann and Jeff's daughter. And she did it as a school project, and she got an A. And you can see why when you take a look at it. So thank you, Kara.
It's true.
Bill, you can unmute.
Yeah, I wanted to just say that I'd like you to keep a guy named Roy Todd in your thoughts. Roy's a friend of mine here at Shannondale, and we found out in the last couple of days that he does have COVID-19 and pneumonia, and has been hospitalized. So one of the few people that I know well here who has been hospitalized for COVID. And he does have some other issues. So this is very, very serious.
Thank you, Bill, for sharing. Our prayers are with him. I don't.
Mary Jane.
Oh, Mary.
Okay.
Jane,
She's
go ahead and
on mute.
unmute.
Tell her.
You should be able to unmute yourself. There you go.
There I go. Oh, okay. I was so amazed when Bill came. I was in the kitchen and Bill told me that we have a place to go for COVID. We're going to have COVID the next day, the shot. And it's all the way in Bethlehem. But, you know, we haven't been out any place for a long time. And it was so nice to be out and so wonderful to be going to get a COVID shot. I didn't think it would happen. I guess I'm old enough now that I can have it.
Thank you for sharing. I know I'm excited because I'm going to get to go out and go to the grocery store today. I don't see anyone else who would like to share.
Gloria.
Oh, Gloria.
Hang on.
Just one sec here.
Okay.
All right, you should be able to unmute, Gloria.
Okay. My little great granddaughter, 6 years old, broke her forearm, and I got to see her, which was very exciting because I don't see anybody ever. And I got to sign her cast, and I couldn't even find room to write Nana on it. It was so filled with names, a large cast, a pretty pink cast down her arm. And I thought, well, I don't have to worry about this little kid. She has a lot of people rooting for her. Her entire cast was covered with names. It was wonderful to see that. It gave me a lift to know that she has all these people that care for her.
Thank you for
Hopefully.
sharing that.
I think Reverend Kim would like to speak.
Reverend Kim.
Hi, everybody. I have a joy to share, and that is that my son, his wife, and our grandson, who's about 16 months, are going to be moving in with us at the end of the month. We do have extra room, so we're really looking forward to that.
Well, that is exciting. That is good news.
Anyone else?
Don't see anybody else. It's always coffee hour afterwards to share. Whether or not you shared today for your joys, we in this community join you in celebration. For any sorrow or concerns, may you feel our sympathy and our compassion. Let's pause for just a moment of gratitude, silent meditation, and prayer. For our closing song this morning, Avi has chosen one of my favorite hymns of all time.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a soul like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear the hour I first believed. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace that brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a soul like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. Was blind, but now I see.
Thank you, Avi. Please feel free to join me in reading our closing or our extinguishing the chalice words as Sonia extinguishes our chalice.
We extinguish our chalice, but we keep its light in our hearts. May it light our path as we leave this place and guide our way until we are together again.
Our service is concluded. Let us continue in fellowship with our coffee hour. Feel free to change to gallery view to see all of our shining faces.